The number that appears the week before. Everything you waited for finally arrives. You saw it again this week. The same two numbers on a clock you didn't mean to look at. And nothing is happening. That's the strange part. No news. No call. No movement. The week feels flat, almost hollow, like the story stopped mid-sentence. So you dismissed it. You told yourself you're pattern hunting because you're tired of waiting. That's a reasonable explanation. It's also wrong. Here is the first layer in plain words. That number does not appear while you are chasing an outcome. It appears in the narrow window after you release it and before it lands. It marks the gap. The 7 days when the old situation has already ended energetically, and the new one has not shown up physically yet. That is why the week feels empty. You are standing between two versions of your life. But that is only the surface reading. What this number is actually doing in those days has 3 layers, and the third is the one almost nobody explains, because it involves something that happens inside you before anything happens around you. Let's start with the week itself. The week nobody tells you about. Think about the last time something you wanted finally arrived. Now go back 7 days before that. What do you remember? Most people remember nothing. A blank. A stretch of ordinary days that felt slightly muted, slightly slower, like the volume of their life had been turned down. That blank is not a memory failure. It is the actual texture of that week. We are taught to expect the opposite. We imagine that good news announces itself. Momentum builds, signs get louder, and the arrival feels earned. That story is comforting. It is also not how arrival works for most people. What actually happens is a flattening. The urgency drops. The obsessive checking stops. You go a whole day without thinking about the thing you wanted, and you notice that with a strange guilt. You interpret it as giving up. It is closer to the opposite. The week before arrival is the week your emotional grip loosens. Not because you stopped caring, but because the internal argument finally exhausted itself. You ran out of ways to force it. And this is exactly where most people misread the entire pattern. They treat the flatness as evidence that nothing is coming. So they panic and reach for the outcome again right at the moment they were finally free of it. Look at what happens in those days. You start noticing repeating numbers in ordinary places. A clock, a total on a receipt, the timestamp on a message you almost didn't open. They arrive when your attention is unguarded. That's the condition, not focused hope. Unguarded attention. There is a reason for that timing. When you are gripping an outcome, your attention is narrow and loud. You cannot register anything subtle. You are scanning for one specific result, and everything else becomes background noise. When the grip loosens, your attention widens. Suddenly, the small things register again. The pattern was probably always there. You simply had no bandwidth to receive it. That is the emotional signature of this week. Quiet. Slightly detached. Oddly clear. And there is a detail in this that changes everything. Because the flatness is not just a side effect of letting go. It is functional. Something is being prepared. And it requires you to stop interfering. People describe that week later using almost identical words. They say it felt like waiting in an empty room. They say the days blurred. They say they had stopped believing, and then it happened anyway. That last part is the piece that confuses everyone. The arrival did not require belief. It required space. So the week feels empty because emptiness is the requirement. You cannot receive something while your hands are still full of the effort to get it. Which brings us to the number itself, because it is not a random combination. It is a specific arrangement, and the arrangement describes exactly what that week is doing. What 1010 actually means. The number is 1010. If you have been seeing it, you are seeing the marker of the threshold week. Look at how it is built. 2 ones, 2 zeros alternating. 1 0 1 0. Initiation, empty space. Initiation, empty space. That structure is the entire message. The ones are beginnings. Direction, initiative, the moment something starts. The zeros are unformed potential. Space that has been cleared but not yet filled. Put them together and you get a rhythm, not a statement. Start, space, start, space. That is what a threshold looks like from the inside. Something has begun, but it is still moving through open space before it becomes visible to you. This is where most people get the meaning wrong. They read 1010 as a promise about the future, so they start scanning the horizon for a big dramatic sign. Then nothing dramatic arrives, and they conclude they misread it. But 1010 is not pointing forward. It is describing right now. It is a status report on the gap you are standing in. Notice something specific about this number compared to others. Fun 11 is pure initiation, all forward momentum. 000 is pure potential, all space. 1010 is both, braided together, alternating. That alternation is why the week feels contradictory. You feel calm and unsettled at once, hopeful and finished at once. Something in you knows it is done, and something in you cannot see the evidence. Both readings are accurate. That is the condition of a threshold. There is another thing this number tracks, and it explains the timing. 1010 tends to appear after a decision has already been made somewhere outside your awareness. Sometimes literally. A person made a choice. A document was approved. A door closed elsewhere so a different one could open toward you. You have not been told yet. The information exists, but it has not reached you. That delay between decision and notification is the 7-day window, and it has a very particular emotional texture, which is why so many people describe the same flatness. You are not waiting for the outcome anymore. You are waiting for the news of an outcome that already happened. That shift changes what you do with the week. If you believe you are still influencing the result, you push. You send one more message. You explain yourself again. You try to control the last mile. If you understand that the result is already set, you stop pushing. You prepare instead. And here is where the first 2 layers end, and the real question begins. Because knowing what 1010 means does not explain why it appears to you specifically, in that week, at those exact unguarded moments. Something has to change in you before the arrival can register. That is the 3rd layer. It starts with understanding what the silence is actually made of. The silence that comes before arrival. There are 2 kinds of silence, and almost nobody learns to tell them apart. The first kind is absence. Nothing is coming. The situation ended. The door closed. And the quiet is simply what remains after something stopped. The second kind is load-bearing. The quiet is holding weight. Something is in motion, and the motion has not surfaced yet. They feel identical from the inside. That is the cruelty of the threshold week. But they are not identical. They have different physical signatures, and once you know them, you stop confusing the 2. Dead silence drains you. You think about the thing and feel tired. The story feels finished and slightly embarrassing. You want to forget you ever wanted it. Loaded silence does something stranger. You think about the thing and feel almost nothing. Not tired, not sad, neutral, like reading about a stranger's life. That neutrality is the marker. It is not indifference. It is completion. And this is where most people misread their own week, because we have been taught that caring hard is the same as being invested. So when the caring goes quiet, we assume the connection broke. Watch what your body does instead of what your thoughts do. In loaded silence, people sleep differently. They organize things. They clean out a drawer for no reason. They cancel plans they had been dreading. There is a detail in this that changes everything. That impulse to clear and organize is not procrastination. It is preparation running ahead of your conscious mind. Some part of you already received the news. It is making room. This is why 1010 shows up in exactly these days. The zeros are the silence, not empty as in worthless, empty as in reserved. Think about what a held space actually requires. It requires nothing to fill it. The moment you fill a reserved space with substitutes, the reservation is gone. That is what happens when people cannot tolerate the quiet. They rush a decision. They take the lesser version of what they wanted, 1 week before the real one arrives. The silence was not asking them to act. It was asking them to hold. Holding is a skill almost nobody is taught. We are taught pursuit. We are taught persistence. Nothing prepares us for the specific discipline of standing in an unresolved week without collapsing it. But there is a reason the silence arrives after release and not before it. And that sequence is not accidental. It is the mechanism itself. Why it appears after you stop forcing it. Notice when you started seeing the number, not when you were fighting hardest, not during the sleepless stretch when you rehearsed conversations in your head at 3 a.m. It started after the exhaustion, after the day you said out loud that you were done trying. Almost everyone reports the same sequence. The signs arrive on the other side of surrender. That timing offends us. It suggests that the thing we wanted was withheld until we stopped wanting it, which feels like a punishment for caring. That reading is understandable and completely backwards. Here is what actually happens. Forcing an outcome requires a very specific internal posture. You have to hold a fixed image of how it must arrive. The exact form, the exact person, the exact timing. That fixed image is not neutral. It filters everything. Anything that does not match the image gets rejected before you consciously see it. So while you are forcing, you are also blind. Not spiritually blind, practically blind. You are running a narrow filter, and this is the part most people get wrong about letting go. They think release means lowering the desire. It does not. It means releasing the form. The wanting stays. The script drops. Watch what that does. The moment the script drops, options that were always available become visible. The message you would have deleted gets read. The unfamiliar route gets taken. The conversation you would have avoided happens. There is a detail here that changes everything. The arrival almost never comes through the channel you were watching. That is not irony. It is structural. You were watching one door with such intensity that you had no attention left for the others. The opening had to wait until your attention was free enough to notice it. This is what the ones in 1010 are doing. Initiation, then space, then initiation again. Each beginning requires the gap after it. Nothing can start in a space you are already occupying with a plan. So the sequence is not reward for surrender. It is capacity created by surrender. And release has a physical feeling that people consistently mistake for defeat. Shoulders drop. Breathing gets deeper. The chest stops bracing. You feel slightly hollow and slightly relieved at once. That hollow feeling is bandwidth. It is what open attention feels like before anything fills it. Which raises the question underneath all of this. If the zeros are open space, what exactly is being held there? Because empty is not the same as unclaimed, and the difference decides everything about how the arrival lands. The code between the ones and the zeros. Break the number apart and read it as a sequence rather than a symbol. 1, 0, 1, 0. The first one is the original impulse, the moment you wanted the thing, the application sent, the feeling admitted, the direction chosen, then the 0. Nothing visible, the period everyone describes as wasted time. Then another one, a second initiation, which you almost never notice because it happens without you. Then the final 0, the week you are standing in. That reading changes the meaning entirely. There were 2 beginnings, not one. The first beginning was yours. You made a move. The second beginning belonged to something outside your reach, a decision made in a room you were not in. Most people only count the first one. That is why the wait feels so long and so passive. They believe nothing started after their own effort. And this is where the misreading becomes painful, because when you only count your own initiation, every day of silence reads as your failure. You go back over what you did wrong. You look for the missing step. There was no missing step. There was a second beginning you were not informed about. The zeros are not gaps in the story. They are the intervals in which authorship changes hands. Look at the structure once more. Your action, silence. Their action, silence, then arrival. That is not a delay pattern. That is a handoff pattern, which explains something about the emotional texture of the final 0. It feels different from the first one. The first silence was anxious, full of self-doubt and revision. This one is flat and oddly clean. That difference is information. Anxious silence means your part is unfinished. Clean silence means your part is over. There is a detail in this arrangement that changes how you read every sign you have been seeing. The number always ends on a 0. It does not end on a 1. It ends in open space, not in an event. That is why 1010 never behaves like a countdown. It is not measuring how many days remain. It is confirming that the space is still held and still yours. Which means the question is no longer when. The question is what that held space is waiting for you to become, because a reserved space has a shape, and the shape has requirements. The test disguised as delay. Somewhere in this week you will be given a chance to sabotage it. Not dramatically. It will look ordinary. A message you could send, a person you could contact for reassurance, an explanation you could offer to someone who never asked for one. It will feel urgent and reasonable at the same time. That combination is the signature. We call this stretch a test, and the word is misleading. Nothing is grading you, but something is measuring. And what it measures is not your worthiness. It measures whether you still believe the outcome depends on your pressure. Here is why that matters practically. If you believe you must push, you will push. And pushing at this stage almost always makes contact with the wrong version of the thing. You reach for the substitute, the lesser offer, the conversation with the person who is not the one, the decision made from scarcity 6 days before the real option appears. And this is where most people lose the week. Not through weakness, through timing. Look at the specific form the temptation takes. It arrives disguised as responsibility. You tell yourself you are being proactive, following up, being mature about it. Sometimes that is true. In this particular week, it usually is not. There is a difference between action from clarity and action from anxiety, and you can identify it in one question. If nothing happened for another 10 days, would you still want to do this? If yes, it is clarity. If the urgency dissolves the moment you imagine having more time, it was anxiety wearing a costume. There is a detail in this that changes everything. The temptation tends to appear immediately after a sighting of the number. You notice 1010, you feel briefly reassured, and within hours the pressure to act spikes. That is not coincidence. Reassurance reactivates hope, and reactivated hope wants to grab. So the sequence goes like this: sign, relief, grab, and the grab is what collapses the reserved space. The discipline being asked of you is small and extremely specific. Notice the sign. Feel the relief. Do nothing with it. Let the relief be the whole event. That is unbearably passive by every standard we were raised with, which is exactly why so few people make it through this week without interfering. And the reason it works has nothing to do with cosmic reward. It has to do with what the zeros are physically holding and why filling them early destroys what was being built. What the zeros are actually holding. Empty space is the most misunderstood thing in this entire pattern. We treat emptiness as a problem to solve. A gap in the calendar, an unanswered message, an unfilled position in our life. So we fill it, quickly, and usually with something adequate. But there is a difference between empty and reserved, and the whole mechanism lives in that distinction. An empty chair is available to anyone. A reserved chair looks identical and is not available at all. The zeros in 1010 are reserved. What are they holding? Capacity, not the outcome itself. The room required to hold the outcome without breaking under it. That sounds abstract until you look at how arrivals actually go wrong for people. Someone waits years for an opportunity. It comes. Within 3 months, they are overwhelmed, resentful, and quietly hoping it ends. The thing arrived before the capacity did. Someone waits for a relationship. It arrives. They cannot stop bracing for its removal. They test it until it breaks. The arrival was never the hard part. Holding it was. And this is where most people misread the delay completely. They assume the wait is about deserving. It is about carrying. Look at what actually changed in you during the long silence. You got quieter. You stopped needing the outcome to prove something about you. You developed the ability to want something without being destroyed by not having it. That last skill is the whole point. Something that arrives while you still need it to validate you will be used for validation. Something that arrives after that need dissolves can be used for what it actually is. There is a detail in this that changes everything. The capacity always finishes forming shortly before the arrival, not years before. Days. That is why the number appears in this specific week and not earlier. It is not announcing the delivery. It is confirming that the container is finally the right size. You can feel this if you look for it. Ask yourself how you would respond today if the thing arrived, and compare it to how you would have responded a year ago. A year ago, you would have grabbed it and shaken. Today, something in you would just receive it and get to work. That difference is not maturity in the abstract. It is a specific structural change, and it required losing something you did not agree to lose. Because to build that capacity, an older version of you had to end. And most people never notice the moment it happened. The last version of you that waited. There is a person who spent all those months waiting. You know them well. They checked constantly. They built explanations for the silence. They oscillated between certainty and humiliation about wanting something this much. That person is not the one reading the signs this week. They ended. Quietly, without ceremony, probably on an unremarkable afternoon. Most people cannot name the day. They only notice the aftermath. A strange lightness, a loss of interest in the story they had been telling about their own situation. That lightness is often mistaken for depression. It is closer to a vacancy. Here is what happened. The waiting version of you was built entirely around not having the thing. Their whole architecture was longing, hope management, and self-defense. When the longing dissolved, the architecture had nothing to hold up. So it went. And what is left is someone who wants the same outcome but is no longer organized around its absence. This is where most people get their own transformation wrong. They wait for a feeling of triumph to mark the shift. There is no triumph. There is a shrug. Look at the small evidence in this week. You tell the story of your situation to someone and hear yourself sound bored by it. You realize you have not checked in 3 days. You catch yourself making plans that do not depend on the outcome either way. Those are not signs of giving up. They are signs of a completed identity change. And there is a detail here that changes everything about the timing. The arrival cannot land on the old version. It would be misused. So it waits for the handover. That is what the second one in 1010 marks. A new initiation that is not an event in the world. It is an initiation inside you. Notice the order once more. Your beginning. Silence. A new beginning. Silence. That second beginning has been you this entire time, which is why the week feels flat rather than triumphant. You are not standing at a finish line. You are standing right after a death nobody attended. That is disorienting. And it is usually accompanied by something else that terrifies people, because in these same 7 days, other things in your life tend to end at once. When old doors close in the same week, something else falls apart this week, often more than one thing. A plan collapses. A friendship goes quiet. A backup option you were counting on disappears. A situation you had tolerated for years suddenly becomes unbearable. The timing feels like an attack. You were finally at peace, and now the ground is moving. Almost everyone reads this as evidence that the good thing is not coming. Some read it as punishment. It is neither. It is clearance. Look at what those things had in common. Every one of them was a version of the outcome that was not the real one. The backup plan existed because you did not believe the real thing would arrive. The tolerated situation persisted because it was almost enough. The friendship survived on a version of you that just ended. They are not being taken from you. They are being removed from the space. And this is where most people panic and fight the wrong battle. They try to repair the closing doors right in the week they should be letting them shut. Notice how the closures happen. They are rarely dramatic. Nothing explodes. Things simply stop responding. Calls do not get returned. Options quietly expire. That gentleness is diagnostic. Doors that are being cleared close softly. Doors that are being denied to you close loudly, with conflict and resistance. There is a detail in this that changes everything. The closures always come in a cluster, not one at a time. A single ending is ordinary life. 3 endings in the same week, none of them your decision, is a pattern. That cluster is the strongest confirmation available in this entire sequence. It means the space is being actively prepared and something has a delivery date. You can test it against your own history. Think about the last significant arrival in your life. Look at the 2 weeks before it. Almost certainly something ended in that window. We tend to remember the arrival and forget the clearance that made it possible. So the week feels like loss and preparation at once. Both are accurate. This is what a threshold costs. And in the middle of that clearance, you will encounter a specific internal state that almost everyone misinterprets. It is the single most common reason people abandon the wait in the final days. The feeling you will mistake for doubt. At some point this week, you will feel nothing at all. Not sadness, not fear, not hope. A complete emotional flatline about the thing you wanted most. You will think you have lost your faith. That reading is almost universal and almost always wrong. Look at what doubt actually feels like. Doubt is loud. It argues. It builds cases. It keeps you awake constructing evidence for why it will never happen. Doubt has energy. It is exhausting because it is active. What you are feeling this week has no energy at all. It does not argue. It just sits there, neutral, uninterested in the debate. That is not doubt. That is neutrality, and neutrality is what arrives when the internal argument is over. We have almost no vocabulary for this state, so we file it under despair, because it is quiet, and quiet has always meant bad news. And this is where most people abandon the week. They interpret their own calm as failure and manufacture urgency to feel alive again. They reopen the argument just to feel invested. Notice what neutrality permits. It permits accurate perception. When you are neutral about an outcome, you can finally see the actual situation instead of your fears about it. That is precisely the condition required to recognize an arrival that does not match your expectations. There is a detail here that changes everything. The people who describe the flatline most vividly are the same people who report that the arrival came within days of it. The flatline is not the end of the story. It is the last thing before the story resumes. Feel the difference in your body. Despair sits in the chest and pulls down. Neutrality sits nowhere. It is a kind of transparency. If you can find nothing when you look for the feeling, that is the flat line. Nothing is not the absence of an answer. Nothing is the cleared space we have been describing this whole time. So the sequence completes itself. Release, silence, clearance, neutrality, and then it comes. Which is where the real surprise waits, because arrival almost never looks the way anyone imagines it, and most people miss the first minutes of it entirely. How arrival actually looks. It will be smaller than you pictured. There will be no music, no moment where everything visibly changes, no sensation of a life reorganizing itself. There will be a message, a short conversation, a document, something almost administrative. You will read it twice and feel oddly calm. That calm confuses people more than anything else in this entire pattern. They expected euphoria and got something closer to recognition. Here is why. Euphoria requires surprise, and by the time it arrives, you already knew. Not consciously, structurally. The clearance happened, the identity shifted, the space was already shaped for it, so the arrival does not feel like a shock. It feels like a fit, and this is where most people misread the biggest moment of the year. They judge the size of the event by the size of their emotional reaction and conclude it was not the thing after all. Look at how arrivals actually enter a life. They come through an ordinary channel on an ordinary day, often midweek, often while you are doing something unrelated. They rarely announce themselves as important. Importance becomes visible later, in retrospect, once the consequences unfold. There is a detail in this that changes everything. The first version of the arrival is usually a small opening rather than the finished thing, not the offer. A conversation that leads to the offer, not the reconciliation. A single unexpected message, not the whole change. One door unlocking. That is the shape of it. A one followed by open space. Again. Which is why people who are waiting for something total miss the beginning of something real. They dismiss the small opening because it does not resemble the completed picture they held for years. So watch what to do with a small opening. You do not evaluate it against the picture. You walk through it and see where it goes. The threshold week does not end with delivery. It ends with an unlocked door and a decision. And that decision is where the last real danger lives. There is one reaction in these first hours that pushes the whole thing back by months, and almost everyone has done it at least once. The mistake that delays it by months. The mistake is grabbing. It happens in the first hour after the opening appears. Something arrives and the old hunger wakes up all at once, and you reach for the whole thing immediately. You over-reply. You explain your entire history in one message. You accept before understanding. You try to convert a small opening into a guarantee before the day ends. It feels like enthusiasm. It functions like pressure. Here is the mechanism. A small opening is an invitation to a process. Grabbing tries to skip the process and secure the result. What gets communicated is not passion. It is fear. And this is where most people undo the entire week of preparation. They spent months building the capacity to hold something, and then handled the first 30 minutes with the hands of the person they used to be. Look at the specific forms grabbing takes. Apologizing for the wait. Over-explaining your value before anyone questioned it. Asking for reassurance about something that has just begun. Notice what all three have in common. Each one imports the anxiety of the waiting period into a situation that no longer contains it. The other side has no idea what you went through. They are starting fresh. When you arrive carrying the whole history, you hand them a weight they never agreed to carry. There's a detail here that changes everything. The delay caused by grabbing is rarely a refusal. It is a withdrawal. Things go quiet again. The conversation loses momentum for no visible reason. Then months later, it reopens, once the pressure has fully dissipated. So the correction is small. Meet the opening at its actual size. If it is a message, answer the message. If it is a conversation, have the conversation. Do not respond to a door with a demand for the whole house. Match the scale. That is the entire discipline, which leaves the practical question everyone actually came here to ask. If pushing is wrong and passivity is not the answer either, what exactly are you supposed to do with these 7 days? What to do in these 7 days? There is something to do, and it is not waiting harder. Prepare the container. That is the whole instruction, and it breaks into a few concrete things. First, finish what is open, not new projects. The unfinished ones sitting in the background. The email you never sent. The document half filled. The apology you owe someone. Open loops consume attention, and you will need attention when the opening comes. Second, make physical space. This sounds trivial, and it is not. People in this week clean instinctively. And the instinct is correct. Clear a drawer. Clear a schedule. Clear a room. The outer clearing rehearses the inner one. Third, protect your neutrality. Do not go looking for reassurance. Do not ask people to predict your outcome. Every prediction reactivates hope, and reactivated hope grabs. And this is where most people get the practical advice wrong. They think preparation means visualizing the outcome. It does not. Visualization at this stage rebuilds the fixed image you already released. Look at what you actually want to be ready for, not the picture, the unexpected version. So prepare capacity, not scenarios. Sleep enough that you can think clearly on an ordinary Tuesday. Handle your obligations so nothing urgent competes for the moment. Be reachable. Fourth, answer things. Read the messages. Take the unfamiliar call. Say yes to the plan you would normally decline. The opening comes through an ordinary channel, and ordinary channels are exactly what we ignore when we are tired. There is a detail in this that changes everything. Almost every account of a missed opportunity involves someone who was too depleted to respond to something small. Not blocked, just tired, and it looked unimportant. Fifth, keep living the week. Not as a strategy, Because a life that continues is what a reserved space looks like from the outside. You are not standing still. You are standing ready, which is a completely different posture. That is all of it. Finish, clear, stay neutral, stay reachable, keep going. And when the week ends and the door finally opens, something happens to your memory of these exact days. It changes shape entirely, and it changes what the number will mean to you for the rest of your life. When you look back at this week, one day, and it will not be far from now, you will remember this week. You will remember it as the quiet one, the stretch where nothing happened and you almost stopped believing anything would. And it will look completely different from the outside. Everything that felt like emptiness will read as preparation. The flatness will read as release. The things that closed will read as clearance. The neutrality you mistook for lost faith will read as the moment you finally stopped needing the outcome to tell you who you are. None of that is visible from inside the week. That is the nature of a threshold. It can only be read backwards. So here is what remains now that all of it has been laid out. The number was never a prediction. 1010 does not promise a date. It confirms a position. It tells you where you are standing, and where you are standing is between 1. Open space. 1. Open space. Your beginning. The silence. A second beginning you did not author. And the held room you are in right now. Nothing in that sequence requires you to force anything. It requires you to remain. That is the hardest instruction ever given to a person who has waited a long time. Remain. Do not fill the space. Do not shrink the ask. Do not grab the first hour. Just remain and stay reachable. The version of you that spent years wanting this is already gone. You do not need to mourn them. They did their work. They kept the wanting alive long enough for the capacity to catch up. What is here now is someone who can hold the thing without breaking it. That is not a small achievement. It was the whole point of the wait. And when the message comes, and it will be smaller than you imagined, you will not feel triumph. You will feel recognition. A quiet, unremarkable sense that this was always the shape it was going to take. That feeling is not anticlimax. It is what alignment feels like when it finally stops being theoretical. So let this week be quiet. Let the drawer stay empty. Let the doors that are closing close. You are not being ignored. You are being timed. And the timing is nearly finished.